Realm presents Tales Beyond Time, Episode 6.
Fellow travelers, welcome back to Tales Beyond Time, presented by Realm. I'm your host, Marco Palmieri, here to take you on another spectacular journey. This week, we're bringing you a pair of monstrous tales by two incredible writers, Victor LaValle and Joyce Chng. Where to start with Victor LaValle? He's a speculative fiction legend and the winner of numerous honors, including the World Fantasy Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Key to Southwest Queens, among other remarkable achievements. It's a privilege to have produced one of his stories in audio. So let's begin our journey this week with I Left My Heart in Skaftafell, originally published in 2004 in Daedalus and narrated for Realm by Ryan Vincent Anderson. It's the strange story of a man, a troll, and a bus journey through Iceland. And, as an extra treat, this story is fully sound designed. Without further ado, please enjoy I Left My Heart in Skaftafell.
I left my heart in Skaftafell. He was meek, homicidal, wore a long scarf tied once around his neck as must have been the style for trolls that year. I never saw him board the bus, but it may have been in Varmalid, though I can't be sure since I slept so much as I traveled through Iceland. I was there at the end of summer, August. Most folks in their 20s had already scamped cross-country in July, so I found myself with the elderly wanderers. August was for the old heads and me. Trails I passed couples catching their breath and rubbing each other's knees through their waterproof pants. The Germans regarded me with tacky detachment, snubbing me while wearing bright red boots and brighter orange parkas. They seemed ridiculous, and yet they looked down on me. I tried not to feel hurt by their disdain, told myself being excluded by them was like being kicked out of clown college, but you can guess how much it really bothered me. Also, I had the amazing misfortune of sitting behind French people on every plane and bus. Minutes into a ride, a woman or man brazenly checked that yes, there was, undeniably, someone back there, then slid the chair so far back, I had a headrest against my gullet. Even when I asked, slapped, tapped, or pushed the seat, these folks only gave that stare the French invented to paralyze the dumb. Luckily, the Icelanders liked me, even though I was an American, because I was shy. Firm, polite, and quiet, a perfect personality for these reserved Northern Europeans. Many times I was told so. "Don't take this the wrong way," one woman in a candy shop said to me, but I explained to my coworker that here, finally, is an American who isn't boring. Being loud and asking so many boring questions. Most Icelanders used English skillfully, but it was a quirk of speech that they said boring when they meant frustrating. Like, "This knot in my shoe is so boring," or "I can't reach my girlfriend, this connection is boring." So this was me, an American, not boring, black, and alone in Iceland. Being both a troll and a smoker, he had little lousy teeth. When his mouth opened, it was hard to distinguish them from his lips. Everything fed into a general maw. Once, he lit up right on the bus as we left Akureyri, so the driver stopped, walked down the aisle, and explained that those were the old ways and he could no longer smoke everywhere he pleased. I sat farther back, but we all heard the warning. There were 31 of us riding the bus, mostly couples. No one else was going alone but me and the monster. By the way, this whole time, let's not talk about the Africans. They had no allegiance to me, of course. Why should they? The white folks weren't hugging each other in Caucasian familyhood. Still, fuck those Africans, and I mean that from the bottom of my soul. In Reykjavik, I went bonkers trying to get a little love from any one of them. Nothing. Not even the faintest soul brother nod. May they all enjoy another 100 years of despotic rule. When I say troll, it probably implies a certain size. We hear troll and think dwarf. But out here, trolls were enormous, according to reports. In a town called Vik, there are 3 spires said to be trolls who were caught in sunlight and transformed to stone as they tried to drag a ship ashore. They're 6 stories high. My troll was man-sized. He wore one beige sweater the whole time, though he paid his bills from a fold of green and purple bills kept tied in a big red handkerchief. Whenever I got off the bus, he got off the bus. It didn't take long to notice the pattern. I'd seen him walking around towns at night, moving with a predatory hunch, hands in his pockets and holding out the sides of his jacket as he moved, so that when the wind got in there, the fabric expanded and he seemed to grow wings. I didn't come to Iceland to fuck Icelandic women, nor to spin in the flash clubs of Reykjavik. Iceland was my destination because for me there was nowhere else to go. The rest of the world was only getting hotter, and, much to the shame of my sub-Saharan ancestors, I was a black man who hated warm weather. So I came to Iceland for the cold, but that wasn't the only thing that brought me. Once there, I paid a little over $200 for a one-way bus ticket around the island. Get off in any town you want, explore, be both gawked at and ignored, then get on the next bus the next day to the next place. Not long before coming to Iceland, I'd stopped wanting marriage. Not only with the woman I lived with, the woman I loved, but with the rest of them too. I saw marriage in my lane and I swerved. While it's true each family is unhappy in its own way, it seems like every married person's complaints are the goddamn same. I had married friends, read novels and articles about the subject, and from what I could tell, that wedding band made you a member of one great, dull, secret society. I also hated the men my friends turned into once they married. Relentlessly horny for any woman besides their wives, seeming angry at their wives for having just one pussy that they'd be stuck fucking for the rest of their lives. I decided I'd rather be alone than so unhappy. Despite that change of mind and all my bluster, it was me feeling sad and longing in Iceland. How many times had I called my ex before taking this trip? Too many to count. But she never picked up. I felt so sexy over there. I felt sexy everywhere, actually. My signature had carnal appeal. Also, the way I wore my wool hat with the ear flaps tied under my chin. Sexy. I'm not being self-deprecating in the slightest. Despite this feeling, I hadn't been to bed with a woman since my breakup, so I felt like a light socket hidden behind the bookshelf. That was probably best, though. Nothing worse than meeting a new woman and you're still nurturing your heartache about the last one. What I hate are those people who can't stand to be alone. They seem so weak. But of course, that's exactly the kind of guy I turned out to be, so the only way to get isolated was to run far, far away, like Iceland. The problem with a trip like mine, and the reason I didn't full Nelson the troll on the first day he started following me, is that I kept seeing the same people in different towns. There was a stumpy Italian couple that I must have greeted 18 times in 4 days. There was a woman from who can say where who became as uncomfortable around me as I eventually did around the troll. She and I just kept picking the same lifeless churches to visit, the same damn coffee houses, until I must have seemed to own a map of her future engagements. I was constantly, accidentally trailing her. Having gone through that made me sympathetic, so the troll got an untold number of rides sitting in a seat near me because I wanted to be fair, At Lake Mývatn, I camped in a long-cooled lava pool under a constant drizzle and occasionally downpours. Inside my tent, I read the short stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Egil's Saga, an ancient Icelandic tale. To me, both seemed like the myths of long-lost civilizations. I forgot the troll while I was there. 4 days at Lake Mývatn, and I never saw him. On a day when it was only lightly drizzling, I rented a bike to get around the lake and, at one point, found a field of lava that had cooled into grotesque stacks. Enormous columns of petrified ash 2 stories high. There were little holes dug into them up near the top that resembled shelves. That's where goblins slept, according to the old stories. When I walked into these endless fields, they seemed to twist behind me. I imagined wandering forward until I found the liege of the goblins reclining on a throne made of sheep skulls. Would I run from him? I didn't know, but part of me wanted to find out. I liked Iceland because they still had myths on their minds. Not that you'd find any younger people who'd admit to believing in goblins or dwarves or little people of any kind. They were too cosmopolitan, too modern for that. And yet, even the most skeptical refused to state their disbelief too loudly in a public place. After the camping trip was over and I climbed on the next bus to the next town, the troll was there. It was like he'd been sleeping in the hood of my jacket this whole time. I boarded the bus and he was already in a seat. When I passed him, I tried to remember that woman I kept seeing from town to town. The troll was probably only doing his own gambling through the country. Why be paranoid? It had nothing to do with me. But then he turned in his seat, looked directly at me, and didn't turn away. It was me who flinched. I looked out my window, watched the bus driver tossing all our bags into the luggage bay. I wrote a postcard to the woman I'd almost married, the woman I hurt so much when I pulled away. In my note, I described to the guy who was following me, but then I decided I couldn't mail the card. I'd been so sure I wanted to be alone, hadn't I? Well, here I was, alone, and immediately I reached for her. Since the troll sat ahead of me, the driver reached him first to check tickets and ask for a destination so he could punch the card.
Breiðesvík,
the troll croaked. His voice was even sleazier than his appearance. The way he whispered the name, it sounded like he was about to crawl up the inside of the driver's leg and bite him in the thigh. Ravenous and repellent, the rattling hiss of a crocodile. Good enough, though. The troll had a destination, and it wasn't mine. I was headed to Djúpivogur and told the driver happily. But when we reached Breiðesvík and the driver pulled over, the troll leaned his head into the aisle and said,
"No, not here. Not yet."
The driver looked harassed, but then kept on driving, both of us still on board. Our bus wove through sharp mountains, big basalt cliffs with little plant life on them because winds eroded them too quickly to grow much. Sheep and cows grazed in meager fields. Finally, we reached Djúpivogur, fishing village of 431 once the bus parked. Couples disembarked. I took my pack from below the bus. The troll took his single hefty black bag. It was a good size, but not enough to carry camping gear, sleeping bag, change of clothes, toiletries. Like mine. His was big enough to hold a human head, I thought. By now, my thoughts were getting macabre. The only hotel in town was beside a tiny harbor. A small modern fleet of boats was moored in tidy rows at the other end of the harbor. Of the 12 vessels there, 10 wouldn't have fit more than 4 people. The last 2 were big, for tours to the island of Pape, famous for its puffins. The clumsy little birds with adorable faces and multicolored bills were the reason I'd stopped here. I wanted to eat one. Cooked, of course. I let the troll register first because I kept making this mistake of thinking that if I caught him in a lie, it would be enough to stop his plans. I'd confront him, yell, "You said you were getting off in Breiðesvík, but you got off in Djúpivogur," and he'd buckle under the weight of my keen observation. He'd screech, then disappear back into the realm of haints and phantoms.
"For one night,"
he said to the young girl behind the desk,
"sleeping bag accommodations will do."
I was on the same plan. Iceland was expensive at this time, even here in the outer reaches. A single room was $60 and wouldn't be much better than a homeless shelter. Sleeping bag accommodations, a tiny cubicle with a cot and a shared bathroom, cost only $20. My room was $8, and the Troll's was $9. When I went back later to try and switch to another, farther room, the clerk told me the rest had been reserved by a team of Norsemen off hulking around some unpronounceable mountain, climbing it with their bare hands, probably. I was relieved. A haul of Vikings was enough company for me to feel safe, even if I was directly next door to the fiend. I waited all evening for them to come, as if they'd already agreed to have my back in case things went badly with the troll. But they never came. The next morning I asked the teenager at the desk, the same clerk as the night before, where the Norsemen had gone. She told me they'd slipped away. A tow rope gave out in their climb and they cascaded into a pyre of bones, flares, and ice axes. For a moment I imagined my trolls scaling the heights of the mountain and snapping their secure lines just so no one would get between him and me. I went back to my room feeling rattled. Afraid is more honest. I tried to sleep away the rest of the morning, but really I just lay there listening for the sounds of the troll. From his room I heard throat clearing and much coughing. He'd hacked so hard I swear I heard the wet tear of his trachea. Rolling around in his cubicle, he bumped the wall more than once, and it felt like a taunt. I didn't go out to the communal toilet, just peed in my room's small sink. At some point, I fell asleep. When I woke again, I heard the troll in that communal bathroom. He was shaving at the sink. I was actually feeling terrible right then, too lonely even for fear. I got out of my sleeping bag and soldiered into the bathroom, stood 3 feet away from the troll, and threw some bass into my voice. "Hey, look," I began. "Are you following me?"
Yes.
What kind of boar's hair was this guy growing? I heard the scratch of his razor running across his throat. It wasn't some disposable either, an enormous contraption. It wasn't electric. It looked like a settler-era plow. As it pulled across his pinkish skin, the sound was a crackling fire. "Why are you following me?" This time, when I spoke, my voice had all the man knocked out of it. I almost whispered.
"I'm going to kill you," he said.
There was still shaving cream on the right side of his face.
"Then I'm going to eat your flesh and put your bones in my soup. I've done it to others, and I'm going to do it to you."
"You really are?"
"I am."
He stopped shaving but hadn't turned to me this whole time. He only looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I stumbled into the toilet. It was where my feet directed me. My room would have been more sensible, but it's hard to be sensible when you hear a threat like that. So I went to the shitter instead. It had a full door so that I was on the inside and, at least nominally, safe from him. He went on shaving that prickly neck for 15 minutes longer. Out of fright, I had to pee, but was too scared to pull down my pants. The sound of metal on skin went on for so long that I thought he must be regrowing the hair he'd just cut. My hirsute pursuer eventually ran water in the sink, and after that he came to the toilet door. He knocked as if I was going to open for him. "Hello," he said. "Hello." I pressed my hands against the cool blue concrete walls on either side of me. If he bashed through the door, I was going to press myself up and kick him straight in the teeth and then do a backflip out the tiny window behind me. Sure I was.
"Why be so afraid?" he whispered. "I could tear down this door right now, but I don't want to be boorish. My name is Gorun. When I come for you, you will know it. But oh my, I can smell your blood from here."
Because of Goroon, I never saw the puffins. He left the bathroom, chuckling to himself, and eventually I stepped out of the stall. I rolled up my sleeping bag and supplies, then went to the front desk to turn in my key. The teenage girl at the desk, the same one who checked me in, the one who'd told me about the Norsemen, was sad when I told her I was leaving without hitting Pape. "Have you been?" I asked her. "I haven't," she admitted, "but I've seen many puffins." She had a dimpled, wide face and couldn't have been more than 17. As she talked, I leaned with my back against the front desk, just to be sure Goroon wouldn't rush the lobby with a hatchet and surprise me. The girl's work schedule was 7 days a week, 8 hours each day. When I commiserated, assuming she must be working that much because she was broke, she laughed and corrected me. "I like to be here," she said. "What else would I do today? My husband is at home without a job." "You're married?" There was gold on the ring finger of her right hand, but you'd be excused for missing it. The metal was whiter than her skin, thin as thread. She was already married at 17, and at 30, I was still as single as a child. "Does everyone here get married so young?" No. A lot of women have children and raise them alone. The father might live nearby, but not in the same home." "We've tried that in the U.S., I said. "And what did you find?" "The boys all grow up to be crybabies." She laughed. "How boring that must be for the women." The bus arrived out front. A few passengers disembarked. Still, I stayed at the desk with the girl. I realized there was something I wanted from her. Not sex, maybe corroboration. I wanted to tell her about the troll, but it seemed too silly to say out loud. And yet this was a magical land. That's what all the tourists were told. "Do your people really believe in elves and all that?" I asked. I wondered if I sounded desperate, if she'd laugh or scold me for being a gullible foreigner. Instead, she only sighed. "If you ever see one, then you will have faith. If you never do, then you won't. It is the same here like it is anywhere, and both sides will never accept each other." A fine point, really. One I would have been willing to accept at any other time in my life, but right then I wanted a direct answer. "But what do you believe?" I said. "Have you ever seen one?" Just then, the bus driver grumbled into the lobby. He asked if there were any passengers getting on the bus. The girl patted my hand lightly, then nodded at the driver. "There are 2, she said. The ride from Djupevor to Skaftafell was 3 hours. I tried to write one more postcard to my ex, but there was an unsteadiness to the roads that showed up in my penmanship. Earlier, I wanted to write asking for help, tell her about Goroon. This time I was trying to write an apology. But the pen wouldn't stay steady on the card. If I'd mailed it to her, she wouldn't be able to understand a word. We moved from the mountainous surroundings that I'd taken for granted into these ongoing fields of long-cooled lava. Evidence on either side of the national highway of an eruption that took place 640 years earlier. Old things here. The fields weren't barren, but grown bright green, mossy, puffy tufts. We stopped at the lake called Jökulsárlón, where the farthest end of a great glacier crumbled into colored hunks of ice. Even these fragments were 3 and 4 stories tall, some blue, others white. This glacier had been moving incrementally for centuries, dragging across the land. The ice was packed with brown and black earth in varied zigzag patterns. Our bus parked for pictures. I was one of the first shooting from the shoreline. There was so much I never imagined I'd see in my life. How lucky I felt just then to witness this. Meanwhile, Goroon stayed near the bus. I wondered if he was afraid of the cold or getting too close to the glacier. How do you defeat a troll? Sunlight was supposed to be one method, but there was Goroon smoking a cigarette by the bus, standing in direct sunlight. Should I put salt on his tongue? Make him say his name backward? If I knew a trick, I would have used it. Instead, I just watched him. Goroon didn't even stare back at me now. He didn't have to. We were past threats. His aggression was a promise. I understood he was going to grab me. A free-floating dread. Women know the feeling I'm talking about. Back on the bus, we rode for another 40 minutes until we reached a tiny white sign welcoming us to Skaftafell National Park. There wasn't much to it. One building, a parking lot, campgrounds, and a mountain. We parked, I disembarked, rented a tent, and made camp. There were lots of folks doing the same, more of those aging European couples as well as some Icelandic families. Too crowded a place for Goroon to get me. I could sit out my time down there and stay safe, or I could go up the mountain and see what came. With the sun up 20 hours a day, there was still a lot of time to climb. I started moving at 4 p.m. Rain stopped, daylight was vivid. Foreign languages, heard as I passed a handful of tents, sounded profound around me. At the far end of the campground, there was a well-established path that slipped onto the mountain, and once I was on it, the land, the people behind me, dissolved. Buses in the parking lot, children calling to parents. Instantly, there was only me. This trail wasn't steep, it just went on for so long. I took pictures of waterfalls until I was sick of waterfalls. Soon the ground lost most of its grass, just dirt and stones. Mostly stones. Walking on them made my ankles hurt. Another 40 minutes and the pain had reached my knees. When I turned back, I could see, far below me, even beyond the campgrounds, 100 little streams, runoff, faint melt from the glacier behind this mountain bleeding out to sea. They crossed each other playfully. I was watching them so closely that it took a few moments before I noticed the troll walking up the path. He was using a cane. His beard had grown in, down to his collarbone. His red scarf was tied below it. He didn't wear a hat. The stick was small but store-bought, red wood. He waved to me. He didn't hurry. I turned toward the peak and went up that way. If I could have run, I would have run. But my legs were aching. I didn't come to Iceland for anything. Iceland came to me in a dream. And not one of my paranoid racism dreams that me being black occur at least once every 28 days. I dreamt I was in the future. It didn't look all that different from now. I just knew it was a later date. I was in New York, by the Gowanus Canal. Around me, thousands of other black people wore yellow rain slickers because the day was overcast. We had boats, or rather, boats were docked, catamarans. Those cruiser types used for whale-watching tours. 100 of them taxied up against the docks in Red Hook. Black people climbed on the catamarans to capacity. Once full, the boats went out to New York Harbor, and from there, the sea. Those of us on the shore cheered, and those on the ships excitedly waved back. No one carried suitcases, but I knew we were leaving America. Not being deported, forget that. Choosing to go. And where were we off to? Iceland. All the black folks in the United States were moving to Iceland because no one lived there anyway. This was a dream, remember, so forget the gaps in logic. Finally, I got on a catamaran. I stayed out on deck even though it began to rain. It was okay because suddenly I was wearing a yellow slicker just like the others. The engine was so powerful, I felt the vibration up through my shoes, strong enough to shake me. The drawbridges along the canal had been lifted not so much for clearance, but to wave goodbye. As our boat pulled off, we passed the garbage transfer stations and old warehouses that had yet to be refurbished. They were slagged apart, walls falling, broke down and decrepit. I could see into each one as we went by. As we moved, I was overjoyed. We all were. Imagine that, a happy story about black people. As we sought larger bodies of water, our boat passed a warehouse as ramshackle as the last 10, but this one was full of gold. Not just gold, honey. Honey in jars and bowls, 200 clear containers, honey spread sticky across the wooden floorboards. Yellow candles were lit and flickering. I heard the wind against the side of my face. Rain slapped my temples, but I felt warm. Gold coins were gathered into piles 2 feet high and just as far across. Yellow fabric was strung up on walls, tied into enormous bows. It was a majestic and reassuring sight, as if we were being told, by who I don't know, that we were doing the right thing, not running away, but running toward something, a fate we couldn't imagine. I understood in that moment that this dream was meant for me, a message. Go. When I woke up, I booked my ticket. Almost at the top of this mountain, Goroon fell farther and farther back. Maybe he was heavier than he looked. My own thighs were boiling from the exertion. I was nearly jogging to the top. On the path, I passed no one. A ribbon of clouds descended over me. A gray mist came down from the gray sky until it touched the highest peak of the mountain. Then it descended farther, consuming the earth quietly until the trail behind me was obscured. There was still the trail ahead. Around the next curve of the mountain path, I finally came to view the great glacier. Skaftafellsjökull. I still wasn't anywhere near it. The ice sat miles away from the mountain, but I saw it clearly. Sunlight reflected against ice particles in the air surrounding the distant glacier with pixie dust. This was the place where I'd meet my fate. Nowhere could be better. Once I understood this, I calmed. Even took out my camera and took pictures of the world while I waited for Goroon. When he arrived, I saw that his beard had grown since I'd last seen him an hour ago. Now it was at his navel. He stooped deeply as he walked, resembled the old Chinese women at the Canal Street train station. I always wanted to protect their fragile-looking spines from injury, scoop them up in my hands, and carry them to a room full of cushions. For an instant, I felt the same affection toward the troll. Our breathing was different. His was much louder. "Not used to the climbs?" I asked. I actually taunted the thing. I snapped his picture with my camera. His cane had a blue stone embedded in the handle, which he rubbed with his fat, yellowed thumb. "I'm having a hard time with this part," he admitted. "I really didn't expect you to go all the way up." I smiled about it, even laughed at him. But once he'd recovered his breath, the troll stopped seeming like a fool. As soon as he could stand straight, he was next to me. I didn't even feel the movement, like water trickles through a closed hand. From 10 feet away, he'd seemed like an old man without the sauce to catch a cab. Now I could see his mouth quite clearly. He was that close. His teeth were tiny, splintered bone fragments, hellish, hideous. "Hello again," he said. He bent down, almost like a bow. Instead, he grabbed my left leg and pulled it from under me so that I fell backward, landing in the stones and snow. My camera went tumbling along the path. Wow, he had small hands, but a strong grip. One hand on my left ankle, one on my left knee. I struggled, but it was a cursory movement, just to say I tried. He pulled my knee toward him and pushed my ankle the other way. The pressure was instant, amazing. I looked down thinking, will my knee pop out of the skin? Will my ankle turn to splinters? Goroon patiently insisted that my lower leg snap. Then my left hand moved into his long hair. I hadn't meant to do it. I wasn't thinking, just suddenly fighting. The stuff on his head rivaled his beard for length. It wasn't as greasy as it looked. It crackled in my hands like straw. I grasped closer to the scalp until I found a patch that wasn't brittle. My leg began bleeding down into my left shoe. Once I had a tight grip, I leaned back so all my weight was pulling at his skull. His skin tore away from his scalp. He started panting. Had I heard him? The mountain, the glacier, they seemed to be waiting for an answer. Which of these two do we get? "You can't have it," I told Goroon, but he wasn't listening. I don't think I even understood what I meant. There was blood on my shoe, yes, but there was blood in my left hand as well. His blood. My right hand went for his beard, and the left was doing so well that I decided not to intervene. My body knew what it was doing. You might even call my determination happiness. He'd take my leg, but I would steal his face. As my right hand came near his whiskers, Goroon opened his mouth. I thought I was far enough away that he couldn't bite, but he had a jaw like a shark's, and the teeth popped past the lips to reach me. The outer edge of my hand was there for him to rip, so he tore into the flesh and then pulled backward, peeling the skin and taking some meat. My right pinky curled down on itself and wouldn't straighten. I still had feeling in the rest of that hand. I thought maybe I should just roll and take us both over the precipice, but the point wasn't to kill him anymore. I'd begun to doubt that such a thing was possible. Kill a myth? I'd watched enough horror movies to know that an unwatched monster always returns. So instead, the point was that I should live. I refused to die. If I had to stay here with him on our backs for 50,000 years, then that's how it would be. Think of all the travelers, men and women, who would be spared Goroon's attacks if I did. Wouldn't that count as something good? We'd be here, locked in battle until our bodies calcified, until we became another landmark on the mountain, one more folktale. My leg wouldn't break. It was obvious from the troll's frustration. He might have liked to scare me by appearing triumphant, but when he attempted to laugh, it made his shoulders buckle. It seemed like he was stifling a sob. Meanwhile, my grip had locked onto his scalp, all 9 of my usable fingers pulling there. Who knew I was such a wonderful, stubborn bastard? In my experience, there seemed to be only 2 kinds of men, brooders and brats. I'd come all this way hoping to discover a third option. I'd never cared if I turned out to be rich or brilliant. More than anything, I just wanted to prove to myself that I could be brave. That, unlike when I left that good woman behind, I wouldn't run from the hard tasks of life. I'd messed up before, but I wouldn't do the same this time. I would persevere. My fatigued brain was commanding my hands to release, relent, surrender, but they refused. I refused. My camera was found by a pair of Belgian kids out hiking 2 days later. They uploaded the pictures to the internet, even the last few where Goroon's face was captured. Our thrashing bodies, with the glacier in the distance, was the last clear shot the camera snapped. Generally, the pictures were dismissed as a mere online hoax. Most commenters on the page said they could create better images without leaving their homes, right on their laptops. But if you're one of the few who felt compelled, somehow lured to Iceland, maybe by those photos or even by a dream, well then follow the journey I've laid out here. When you reach the top of the mountain and see the glacier in full view, there's a short tongue of land that juts forward. It'll seem a little dangerous to walk out there, but step onto it anyway. At its edge, you'll see an enormous boulder. It's as big as 2 men. Come close. Press your ear to the cold stone. Forget the doubts of non-believers. Quiet your breathing. Listen. Yes. I am whispering in your ear.
Just between us, this is why I avoid bus tours. But don't get too comfortable because our next offering won't exactly help you sleep at night. Our second story is by Singaporean sci-fi, fantasy, and YA writer Joyce Chng, and we're thrilled to bring you one of her more chilling tales. The Thing You Feed, originally published in 2018 in The Future Fire and narrated for Realm by Christina Ho, is a unique twist on werewolves. In the wake of the Mooncake Festival, a student starts to see a dark wolf, and it's coming closer. I'm very pleased to present The Thing You Feed.
It started to all go weird after Mooncake Festival. Perhaps I ate too many mooncakes or drank too much jasmine tea bought from the local Asian grocery shop. Perhaps I stayed up too late staring at the full moon. Where I lived, in the dingy little dormitory I shared with 2 other people, the moon loomed large and pearly white, its surface scarred by impacts. It rose in the sky, and we cheered, missing home and missing our parents. The moon was always bigger elsewhere. I thought I had acclimatized. Uni was big and beautiful, the landscape lush with trees and shrubs. I was so in love with the oaks. The air was crisp, laced with the smell of eucalyptus and other aromatic plants. I was fortunate to have a group of supportive international student friends, minus the first few days when I was heckled on the streets. Someone deliberately stepped on my slippers so that I tripped, falling onto the concrete. I had skinned knees and a bruised ego. The workload for a 2-year MA was bearable, with my module tutors and thesis supervisor being immensely helpful and compassionate. I was happy. I should be grateful. Except I wasn't. Something ate away at me, hollowing me out. After Mooncake Festival, I started to feel like a stranger in my own body. There were moments when I watched myself from the outside. Who is this individual? Who are they? My psych friends said I was dissociating and I should talk to a counselor as soon as possible. I brushed their concerns off. I had my thesis to complete. I had things to write. Besides, my appetite was still good, and I was eating. Ravenously. Something stirred within me, spinning inside my bones, coiling up my spine. The sensations grew more intense when the nights were lonely. I curled under my blanket, trying not to cry myself to a numb sleep. It started appearing at the corner of my eye. At first, it was a dark shadow slipping in and out of my awareness. Then it coalesced into something bigger. I grew hungry, feasting on the toffee apples and the chocolate muffins I bought from the deli. I ate and ate. When I was drafting the first chapter of my thesis one night, it stood fully formed. It was a canine-shaped shadow with pointed ears and long, lanky limbs. Its eyes were the color of dark blood tinged with gold flecks. Twin twilight skies. The dorm didn't allow pets. I thought one of my dorm mates had secretly sneaked it in. I got up from my chair, thinking I could just grab the dog because it wasn't that big, medium-sized, lean like a whippet. The shadow dog lowered its head, snarled, and vanished like smoke, slowly dissipating in the wind. There was no wind. There was no shadow. There was no dog. I stared at the empty space where the shadow dog once stood. For some strange reason, I lifted my hands up, looking at them as if they were odd things growing out from my body. I stared at my skin, at the green veins running beneath the paleness, at the fine hair follicles standing up. Something padded around in circles inside my chest before settling down to sleep. My ribs expanded and contracted with its breathing. It started to turn up often. By then, I was already enjoying my life at uni. Before Mooncake Festival, I met a guy in the computer lab while I was chatting in a science fiction RPG channel and realized that he was also on the same server. After a couple of weeks of bantering to and fro, he finally mustered up the courage to ask me out. Our first date was on a windy Sunday with vineyards and an afternoon movie. We talked about why I use chopsticks. Lunch was a platter of cheese and fresh fruits. Sunday nights were also Skype nights with my parents. Mom thought I looked well. She was afraid I wasn't getting enough food. I reassured her I was eating well, maybe too well. She told me about my younger sister getting a promotion. I laughed along, humoring my mother. Years ago, I had secretly nicknamed my sister Ms. Perfect. Behind her, I could see Dad rolling his eyes. He hated our not-so-subtle competition. Mom was always on the side of Ms. Perfect, the perfect kindergarten performance, the perfect grades she got in school, the perfect awards she won year after year, even the perfect boyfriend she found at her uni, scholar and well-to-do family. Local university, Mom liked to remind me. I hated myself. The moment I turned off Skype, I wolfed down a cup of Tom Yum-flavored instant noodles. After one particularly bad Skype session with Mom, I ran straight to the bathroom to peer frantically at the mirror. Mom had remarked I looked more haggard than usual. I told her it was stress. My supervisor had rejected my second chapter about Amazons. I had to totally rewrite the whole thing, and I had cried for a long time after I left her office. The dark dog shadow wagged its tail slowly, its tongue hanging from its open mouth. I yelled, really yelled. Someone knocked on the door. Shaking, I opened it. It was Sarah, my course mate. Her research was about feminist magazines from the 1960s until now. She wore a plain white tee and brown shorts. She looked as if she had just woken up. She also looked hot. "You okay?" she asked. "Just a spider," I lied. The dog had disappeared. Sarah didn't look convinced. "Just knock on my door if you want to chat, Kay?" I closed the door, relieved that Sarah didn't probe further. Maybe I should go and talk to one of the counselors at Student Services. Maybe I was just working too hard. Maybe I was really homesick, and I had internalized it, turning it into something worse, like depression. Depression. Eat. The next day, I got a new haircut and dyed my hair with caramel blonde streaks. At dinner time, Sarah rolled her eyes at me. She said I looked butch. I rolled my eyes back at her. It started talking to me. I was struggling with my third chapter. Words weren't coming out. I was dry. Worse, I had broken up with Steve because we weren't talking honestly about our true feelings. I was an emotional wreck, missing meals and tutorials, sleeping in late. Mom informed me about Ms. Perfect getting yet another pay raise and taking her and Dad to Hong Kong for a week. She then proceeded to send me pictures of roast geese, crispy skin gleaming under the restaurant's lights, and freshly baked bolo bao, and Ms. Perfect's smug face in every picture. That pleased gleam in her eyes. She had won. She had always won. She would always keep on winning. I couldn't take my parents out for a simple meal. For that long week, I wanted to quit and go home. To what? Misery? Disappointment? Shame? Mostly shame, because Mom and Dad paid half for my MA. Mostly disappointment, because I might go home without a degree. Mostly misery. Misery. I could hear my sister's oh-so-kind laughter, and that expression, so smug, so self-satisfied. I wanted to eat her up and then spit her out. Eat. I didn't need her pity. No more, "You can do it, sis," nonsense. No more, "You can still look for a job, and MA doesn't mean you can't find one," bullshit. I didn't need her at all. Eat her. Eat her. Eat her. The dark dog shadow stirred, like a dry whisper, padding out from some hidden space. This time, it sat where I would glance nervously at it, from the corner of my eye, a bigger and leaner dog. Wolf, I thought. It was more wolf-like now. More muscular, with a thick, ruffed neck. Except there weren't supposed to be wolves where I was. What are you? I asked. You. Not you. Either. Neither. Your past. Its voice sounded like mine, only lower, as if I was growling at the end of the corridor of my dorm. I fell out of my chair, afraid, panicking. I reached out to grab my phone, only to fall back onto the carpeted floor. I was pinned down firmly by its large, solid paw. I am all your past thoughts, all your past deeds, what you did, what you didn't do, what you felt, what you didn't feel, what you chose to hide. I didn't hide anything. Its lips curved into a very human smile. Oh, yes, you did. Your feelings about home, your feelings about being an outsider, your feelings about anger, your feelings about your grades, your feelings about not feeling worthy, your feelings about rage that your sister is better, so much better than you. Shut up, I sobbed. Tears rolled down my face. I was talking to an imaginary dog. Your rage cannot and should not be caged in. Your sorrow is a chained animal. Your pain is delicious. You have to taste your pain, devour your sorrow, eat it. I am going nuts. The paw withdrew, and I pushed myself up with my hands. My arms shook with the effort. I was inexplicably weak. Sarah lived next door to me. I was desperately wishing that she might hear all this. You pushed me aside, suppressed me, pushed me out. Without me, you are nothing, just flesh and bone. You eat, and I grow big. What should I do? I inched away from the wedge-like head, from the dripping upper canines. Accept me back. Why? I glanced at my laptop. The thesis had to be written. I needed to get my MA. I needed to eat. I needed approval. I craved approval. Like. Food. Eat. The dog blinked and smiled wider, its teeth looking more wicked in the light. Yes. Yes. I opened my arms to embrace the dog shadow. The animal padded closer, closer, until it pressed against my chest. It smelled of gunpowder and other kinds of burnt things, like Grandma's paper money when it caught fire, like candle smoke, like unrequited love, like millions of years of loss and regret. It was warm like my body's blood, like a gentled sun. It had no fur, only a flowing, shadowy surface. It melted into me, shadow into flesh. I felt it sigh, a soft sound that coursed through my body. Home, 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 it said. Home, home, home. The gentled sun became a roaring fire, an internal inferno. My skin flamed up. My hair burned. My voice crawled up my throat and found strength in a howl. Suddenly I wanted to hunt. Suddenly we wanted to hunt. We eat. We started to hunt in the dark. We ran past the doors, down the corridor, glad for the silence. Nobody stepped out. Everyone kept to their own business, even Sarah, who professed concern a while back. We ran barefoot, the ground laced with moisture, down the cold alleyway, in the darkness where sounds chittered and small shapes lurked. It was approaching midnight, the stars gleaming in the sky in a huge swath. The smells of the night called to us. Cooking oil, someone's log fire, hints of concrete and tar, the fragrances of the trees sharp in our nostrils. We hunted a cat who had been let out by her owners and was forgotten. The meat was crunchy with small bones, and the marrow dripped down my throat. We hunted a toy dog left on the porch, its yips drowned when we snapped its neck with a bite. We hunted and we ran. There was freedom when we ran. There was freedom when we hunted. The sky spun above us. The stars were flecks of gold. We hunted, fed, and were sated. I woke up under a eucalyptus tree right outside my dorm. It was still dawn. My arms were covered in drying brown-red smears, my fingers crusty with dried blood. I was damp with wet soil and wood chips clung to my skin. I was still wearing my shorts. Quietly, I slipped back into my dorm. I stood under the hot shower for an hour. The dog thing was satisfied. I was satisfied. Let's eat. We started hunting more. My thesis soon expanded. My supervisor was pleased and commented I looked very well. I licked my lips, still tasting the blood from last night's hunt. Mom was pleased and said I looked more confident than usual. She didn't mention my sister. I growled with pleasure. She didn't know my feet were stained with grass and earth. My teeth tingled with participation. Of course, I felt stronger. Blood coursed through my veins like liquid fire. I was a new person, whole. I asked Sarah out for a date, but it didn't work. We both giggled about it and left it at that. I also got back with Steve after a long and thoughtful talk on the phone. We were going to explore Mandurah on a weekend. This time he might just pop the question. When the full moon rose in the sky, I laughed and ran in the dark. I hunted those who heckled me. I drank in their blood. I ate. The dog thing laughed inside me. I am coming for you, Miss Perfect. You will never win. I smiled the dog smile. Hunting will be most delicious. We eat.
So, have these dark tales left you wanting more horror? Check out Silverwood. Deep in a serene California forest, a monster from another dimension is desperate for human blood. Or maybe try The Shadow Files of Morgan Knox, about an Afro-Latina PI in 1930s Manhattan who can see the darkness coming, but may not be able to stop it. Both shows are out now and available wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, whatever dimension you're in, safe travels.
You're listening to Tales Beyond Time, created and produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Listen away. Tales Beyond Time, Episode 6, features I Left My Heart in Skaftafell, written by Victor LaValle, and The Thing You Feed, written by Joyce Chng. It's produced by Mary Asadolahi and Marco Palmieri, associate produced by Alexis Latshaw, and executive produced by Molly Barton. Hosted by Marco Palmieri and performed by Ryan Vincent Anderson and Christina Ho. Audio produced by TieDef Studios. Additional editing by Nicholas Papaleo. Cover art by Kendall Thomas.